Our imperialists really aim, and the fact must be constantly borne in mind, at federalising the relation not between England and the rest of the empire, but between England and the 5 self-governing dominions. But then this admission, while it does away with some of the difficulties besetting the policy which is miscalled imperial federalism, raises a whole body of difficult and all but unanswerable questions. Take a few of the inquiries to which sanguine reformers, who talk with easy confidence of federalism being the solution of all the most pressing constitutional problems, must find a reply. What is to be the relation between the new federated state, consisting of England and the 5 dominions, and British India? Will the millions who inhabit India readily obey a new and strange sovereign, or will the states of the new confederacy agree that the rest of the empire shall be ruled by the Parliament and government of England alone? Is the whole expense of imperial defence to be borne by the federated states, or will the new federation of its own authority impose taxes upon India and the Crown colonies for the advantage of the federated state? Is it certain, after all, that the mutual goodwill entertained between England and the dominions really points towards federalism? No doubt England and the states represented at the imperial conferences entertain a genuine and ardent wish that the British Empire should be strong and be able, as against foreigners, and even in resistance to secession, to use all the resources of the whole empire for its defence and maintenance. But then each one of the dominions desires rather the increase than the lessening of its own independence. Is there the remotest sign that, for example, New Zealand, though thoroughly loyal to the Empire, would tolerate interference by any imperial parliament or congress with the internal affairs of New Zealand, which even faintly resembled the authority exerted by Congress in New York, or the authority exerted by the Parliament of the Canadian Dominion in Quebec? But if the dominions would not tolerate the interference with their own affairs by any parliament, whatever its title, sitting at Westminster, is there the remotest reason to suppose that the existing imperial parliament will consent to become a parliament of the empire in which England, or rather the United Kingdom, and each of the 5 dominions shall be fairly represented? But here we come to a further inquiry to which our new federalists hardly seem to have given a thought. What are they going to do with the old imperial parliament, which has, throughout the whole history of England, inherited the traditions and often exerted the reality of sovereign power? Under our new federation, is the imperial parliament to become a federal congress wherein every state is to have due representation? Is this federal congress to be for Englishmen the English Parliament, or is there to be, in addition to, or instead of, the ancient Parliament of England, a new local English Parliament controlling the affairs of England alone? This question itself is one of unbounded difficulty. It embraces 2 or 3 inquiries, the answers whereto may trouble the thoughts of theorists, and these replies, if they are ever discovered, may give rise throughout England and the British Empire to infinite discord. Is it not one example of the perplexities involved in any plan of imperial federalism, and of the intellectual levity with which they are met, that our federalists never have given a clear and, so to speak, intelligible idea of what is to be under a federal government the real position not of the United Kingdom, but of that small country limited in size, but still of immense power, which is specifically known by the august name of England? The traditional feuds of Ireland and the ecclesiastical grievances of Wales, the demand of some further recognition of that Scottish nationality, for which no sensible Englishman shows or is tempted to show the least disrespect, all deserve and receive exaggerated attention. But England and English interests, just because Englishmen have identified the greatness of England with the prosperity of the United Kingdom and the greatness and good government of the Empire, are for the moment overlooked. I venture to assure all my readers that this forgetfulness of England, and by England I here mean the country known and famous as England before the legal creation either of Great Britain or of the United Kingdom, is a fashion opposed both to common sense and to common justice, and, like all opposition to the nature of things, will ultimately come to nothing. The questions I have mentioned are numerous and full of complexity. The present time, we must add, is intensely unfavourable to the creation of a new federalised and imperial constitution. The Parliament and the government of the United Kingdom may be chargeable with grave errors. They have fallen into many blunders, but they have never forgotten, they will never, one trusts, forget, that they hold, quote, a common trusteeship, whether it be in India or in the Crown colonies, or in the protectorates, or within our own borders, of the interests and fortunes of fellow subjects who have not yet attained, or perhaps in some cases may never attain, to the full stature of self-government. End quote. Sir Joseph Ward. Is it credible that, for instance, the peoples of India will see with indifference that this trusteeship pass from the hands of an imperial parliament, which has more or less learned to think imperially and in England has maintained the equal political rights of all British subjects, into the hands of a new-made imperial congress which will consist in part of representatives of dominions which, it may be of necessity, cannot give effect to this enlarged conception of British citizenship? Second, the unity of the empire does not require the formation of a federal or of any other brand new constitution. I yield to no man in my passion for the greatness, the strength, the glory and the moral unity of the British Empire. I am one of the thousands of Englishmen who approved and still approve of the war in South Africa because it forbade secession, but I am a student of the British Constitution. My unhesitating conviction is that the Constitution of the Empire ought to develop, as it is actually developing, in the same way in which grew up the Constitution of England. The relation between England and the dominions, and as far as possible between England and the colonies which are not as yet self-governing countries, need not be developed by arduous feats of legislation. It should grow under the influence of reasonable understandings and of fair customs. There are, as I have intimated, two objects on which every imperialist should fix his eyes. The one is the contribution by every country within the empire towards the cost of defending the empire. The second object is the constant consultation between England and the dominions. The English taxpayer will not, and ought not to, continue forever paying the whole cost of imperial defence. The dominions cannot for an indefinite period bear the risks of imperial wars without having a voice in determining if such wars should begin, and when and on what terms they should be brought to an end. Imperial statesmanship is rapidly advancing in the right direction. The system of imperial conferences and other modes of intercommunication between England and the dominions will, we may hope, result in regulating both the contribution which the dominions ought to make towards the defence of the empire and the best method for collecting colonial opinion on the policy of any war which may assume an imperial character. My full belief is that an imperial constitution based on goodwill and fairness may within a few years come into real existence, before most Englishmen have realised that the essential foundations of imperial unity have already been firmly laid. The ground of my assurance is that the constitution of the empire may, like the constitution of England, be found to rest far less on parliamentary statutes than on the growth of gradual and often unnoted customs. Characteristics of federal government in relation to Home Rule all round. Advocates of the so-called federal solution apparently believe that the United Kingdom as a whole will gain by exchanging our present unitary constitution for some unspecified form of federal government. To an Englishman who still holds, as was universally held by every English statesman till at the very earliest 1880, that the union between England and Scotland was the wisest and most fortunate among the achievements of British statesmanship, there is great difficulty in understanding the new belief that the federalisation of the United Kingdom will confer benefit upon any of the inhabitants of Great Britain. A candid critic may be able to account for the existence of a political creed which he does not affect to share. The faith in Home Rule all round has been stimulated, if not mainly created, by the controversy lasting for 30 years and more over the policy of Home Rule for Ireland. British Home Rulers have always been anxious to conceal from themselves that the creation of a separate Irish Parliament and a separate Irish Cabinet, depending for its existence on such Parliament, is a real repeal of the Act of Union between Great Britain and Ireland. This refusal to look an obvious fact in the face is facilitated by the use of that most ambiguous phrase, Home Rule all round. Federalism has, no doubt, during the last 30, or one may say 50, years, acquired a good deal of new prestige. The prosperity of the United States, the military authority of the German Empire, may by federalists be put down to the credit of federal government, though in matter of fact no two constitutions can, either in their details or in their spirit, bear less real resemblance than the democratic and on the whole unmilitary constitution of the United States and the autocratic imperial and above all military government of Germany. Federal government has also turned out to be the form of government suitable for some of the British dominions. It has been an undoubted success in the Canadian Dominion. It has not long been tried, but has not been a failure in the Australian Commonwealth. It may become, Englishmen are inclined to think it is, the best form of government for the states included in the Union of South Africa. Little reflection, however, is required in order to see that none of these federations resemble the Constitution of England either in their historical development or in their actual circumstances. Then, too, it is thought that whereas English statesmen find it difficult to regulate the relation between Great Britain and Ireland, the task will become easier if the same statesmen undertake to transform, by some hocus-pocus of political legerdemain, the whole United Kingdom into a federal government consisting of at least 4 different states. It is supposed, lastly, though the grounds for the supposition are not very evident, that the federalisation of the United Kingdom is necessary for, or conducive to, the development of imperial federalism. Federalism, in short, has at present the vague, and therefore the strong and imaginative, charm which has been possessed at one time throughout Europe by the parliamentary constitutionalism of England and at another by the revolutionary republicanism of France. It may be well, therefore, to state with some precision why, to one who has studied the characteristics of federal government, it must seem in the highest degree improbable that the Home Rule all round, or the federal solution, will be of any benefit whatever to any part of the United Kingdom. 1. There is no trace whatever of the existence of the federal spirit throughout the United Kingdom. In England, which is after all by far the most important part of the kingdom, the idea of federalism has hitherto been totally unknown. Politicians may have talked of it when it happened to suit their party interest, but to the mass of the people the idea of federation has always been, and I venture to assert at this moment is, unknown and all but incomprehensible. Scotsmen sometimes complain that Great Britain is often called England. They sometimes talk as though they were in some mysterious manner precluded from a fair share in the benefits accruing from the unity of Great Britain. To anyone who investigates the actual course of British politics, and still more of British social life since the beginning of the 19th century, these complaints appear to be utterly groundless. The prejudices which, say, in the time of Dr. Johnson, kept Scotsmen and Englishmen apart, have in reality vanished. To take one example of disappearing differences, we may note that while many leading Englishmen fill in Parliament Scottish seats, many Scotsmen fill English seats. What is true is that the course of events, and the way in which the steam engine and the telegraph bring the world everywhere closer together, are unfavourable to that prominence in any country which at one time was attainable by particular localities, or by small bodies of persons living somewhat apart from the general course of national life. This change has, like all other alterations, its weak side. It is quite possible honestly to regret the time when Edinburgh possessed the most intellectual society to be found in Great Britain or Ireland. It is also possible honestly to wish that Lichfield and Norwich might still have, as they had at the beginning of the 19th century, a little and not unfamous literary coterie of their own. There is a sense in which the growth of large states is injurious to the individual life of smaller communities. The Roman Republic and the Roman Empire did not produce thinkers or writers who did as much for the progress of mankind as was done by the philosophers, the historians, and the poets of Greece, and the fruits of Greek genius were mainly due to the intellectual achievements of Athens during not much more than a century. Ireland is, as regards most of its inhabitants, discontented with the Union, but it is idle to pretend that Ireland has ever desired federalism in the sense in which it was desired by the colonies which originally formed the United States, or by the inhabitants of what are now the provinces of the Canadian Dominion. O'Connell for a very short time exhibited a tendency to substitute federalism for repeal. He discovered his mistake and reverted to repeal, which with his more revolutionary followers meant nationalism. No one who reads the last and the strangest of the biographies of Parnell can doubt that Ireland a nation was the cry which met his own instinctive feeling no less than the wishes of his followers, except insofar as their desires pointed towards a revolutionary change in the tenure of land rather than towards the claim for national independence. 2. There is good reason to fear that the federalisation of the United Kingdom, stimulating as it would the disruptive force of local nationalism, might well arouse a feeling of divided allegiance. This topic is one on which I have no wish to dwell, but it cannot be forgotten by any sensible observer who reflects upon the history of secession in the United States, or of the Sonderbund in Switzerland, or who refuses to forget the preeminently uneasy connection between the different parts of the Austrian Empire and the deliberate determination of Norway to sever at all costs the union with Sweden. Nor is it possible to see how the federalisation of the United Kingdom should facilitate the growth of imperial federalism. 3. Federalism, as the dissolution of the United Kingdom, is absolutely foreign to the historical and, so to speak, instinctive policy of English constitutionalists. Each successive generation from the reign of Edward I onwards has laboured to produce that complete political unity which is represented by the absolute sovereignty of the Parliament now sitting at Westminster. Let it be remembered that no constitutional arrangements or fictions could get rid of the fact that England would, after as before the establishment of Home Rule all round, continue, in virtue of her resources and her population, the predominant partner throughout the United Kingdom, and the partner on whom sovereignty had been conferred, not by the language of any statute or other document, but by the nature of things. It would be hard indeed to prevent the English Parliament sitting at Westminster from not only claiming but exercising sovereign authority, and to all these difficulties must be added one ominous and significant reflection. To every foreign country, whether it were numbered among our allies or among our rivals, the federalisation of Great Britain would be treated as a proof of the declining power alike of England and of the British Empire. The referendum. The word referendum is a foreign expression derived from Switzerland. 30 years ago, it was almost unknown to Englishmen, even though they were interested in political theories. 20 years ago, it was quite unknown to British electors. The word has now obtained popular currency, but is often misunderstood. It may be well, therefore, to define, or rather describe, the meaning of the referendum as used in this introduction and as applied to England. The referendum is used by me as meaning the principle that bills, even when passed by the House of Commons and by the House of Lords, should not become Acts of Parliament until they have been submitted to the vote of the electors and have received the sanction or approval of the majority of the electors voting on the matter. The referendum is sometimes described, and for general purposes well described, as the people's veto. This name is a good one. It reminds us that the main use of the referendum is to prevent the passing of any important act which does not command the sanction of the electors. The expression veto reminds us also that those who advocate the introduction of the referendum into England in fact demand that the electors, who are now admittedly the political sovereign of England, should be allowed to play the part in legislation which was really played and with popular approval by, e.g. Queen Elizabeth, at a time when the King or Queen of England was not indeed the absolute sovereign of the country, but was certainly the most important part of the sovereign power, namely Parliament. In this introduction, the referendum, or the people's veto, is considered simply with reference to bills passed by the Houses of Parliament, but which have not received the royal assent. The subject is dealt with by no means exhaustively, but with a view in the first place to bring out the causes of the demand in England for the referendum, and in the next place to consider carefully and examine in turn, first, by far the strongest argument against, and secondly the strongest argument in favour of, introducing the referendum into the Constitution of England. The causes. During 40 years, faith in parliamentary government has suffered an extraordinary decline, or, as some would say, a temporary eclipse. This change is visible in every civilised country. Depreciation of, or contempt for, representative legislatures clearly exists under the parliamentary and republican government of France, under the federal and republican constitution of the Swiss Confederacy, or of the United States, under the essential militarism and the superficial parliamentarism of the German Empire, and even under the monarchical and historical constitutionalism of the British Empire.